some that would argue that, certainly in the southeast or in the south, that having white would reflect some of the radiation from the sun. It's not a big concern in Wisconsin. We need as much warmth on these insects as we can. So you can paint your hive whatever color you want to paint it to match your landscape. I've had students in the past who have stained their hives because if they have a more, say, formal, maybe European style garden where they didn't want kind of audacious colors, you can stain them, you can paint them. I love this one in the top right hand corner, that one's really fun. But of course Hello Kitty has its own place too, if that's what you need in your landscape. So, when you're starting to think about your own apiary, don't limit yourself to just sort of the color white. Be as creative as you want. I made a hive for my niece a few years ago, and it was Disney Princess Purple. And you'll see pictures of that, I think. So hives themselves, bees can live anywhere. The hives that you will, that you'll end up using for your own bees will, and we're going to talk about that before we leave today, are largely going to be manufactured by a supply company, and they're going to be made to fairly high size tolerance. Because one of the things that you want to make sure is that you don't violate that space in between each of those frames that Langstroth sort of identified as that bee space. If you violate that, the bees will start making comb, and they'll really disrupt the idea of that movable frame. They will essentially make comb in the wrong places, and the frames will be kind of locked together, and it just won't work. But hives can be made of a variety of materials. I want to go into making honey because I think that's the reason why a lot of people get into keeping bees, and honestly, I think it's a great answer. It's making honey. Because people may come ask you, well, is honey bee poop? No. Or is it bee throw up? No. Honey is nectar that was collected by honeybees from nectaries and flowers and brought back to a hive, and then more or less ripened. The first step is in making honey is foraging and transport. So this is a kind of a cross section of a honeybee. There are a couple of really key points. A few years ago, I had someone tell me that honey was bee vomit. And I want to clarify really quickly, just to kind of put your mind at ease. There is, unlike us, we have one stomach. Well, honeybees sort of more or less have two. They have something called a honey stomach, which is a stomach that is largely like a suitcase. And its sole purpose is to carry nectar. Then it has a digestive stomach like you and I have. Now the two are connected. There's a small sphincter that connects the honey stomach from the actual digestive stomach. So as the honeybee or the worker is foraging, if she collects nectar and she needs to consume some of that, digest it for energy, she can open that sphincter and allow some of that nectar to the digestive stomach. But that sphincter stays closed otherwise. After the worker has gone out and foraged and filled her honey stomach up, she'll fly back to the hive. Now this is kind of fascinating. We've talked a lot about how social these insects are, so it probably shouldn't surprise you. The insect on the right, the insect on the left that we're going to refer to as the donor, that's the insect that just went out and foraged. Now that insect came back, her honey stomach is full. She's going to pass that nectar sort of out of her honey stomach into the honey stomach of the receiver. Very social insect. She's sort of unloading her suitcase into the suitcase of the next bee down the line. The receiver honeybee then takes the nectar and places it into a cell. Now this is a cell that's separate from where the eggs are being raised. Not the same, different part of the hive. Think of it more like your pantry. And as that process is happening, as the donor is transferring that nectar to the receiver, there are three key enzymes that have been added. The first one is called invertase, and this is probably the most critical one. Invertase is going to break sucrose, which is that natural sugar, into fructose, into glucose. So it's breaking it into two simple sugars. Diatase, there is a little bit of starch that's in that nectar, and it's going to be broken by diatase. Glucose oxidase then is going to take part of this glucose that invertase has made, and it's going to form it into gluconic acid, and more importantly, hydrogen peroxide. And so people have often asked, well, what's the shelf life of honey? I've heard, you can leave it for 2 years. it's almost indefinite. A honey that has been found in some of the Egyptian tombs is not rotten. You can certainly still eat it. The honey that's maybe in your own cabinet that is crystallized and kind of hard, you can certainly still eat that too. And it's large part due to the formation of hydrogen peroxide. So it's not enough hydrogen peroxide that's going to hurt you, but it's enough hydrogen peroxide that it will certainly serve as an antifungal, kind of bacterial source. And it's going to keep that honey from really going bad. The last step is evaporation. So nectar contains about 60 to 90% water. Honey contains about 16 to 18% water. The other reason why honey doesn't spoil is because it doesn't have enough water really to support life. And so because of the presence of hydrogen peroxide in this low water environment, honey almost has an indefinite lifespan. To make a pound of honey, I think these are just some great little numbers. You can imagine the amount of effort that it's taken to make 1 pound of honey. Now, 1 pound of honey is more or less one of the little plastic squeezy bears that you see at the grocery store. That's 1 pound of honey. And so it's a tremendous amount of work that workers have had to do. There are a couple of types of honey. One of the things that we're going to do either on a Wednesday or possibly before or during our next class together is I'd like to have a honey show. And as I've traveled around and I collect honey, it's just what I do. Some people collect spoons, I collect honey. And I'm going to bring some honey for you to try. There are a couple of types of honey. Honey falls into a couple of categories. The first one on the top left is liquid honey. It's the honey that you're most likely familiar with. You can either buy it in a glass jar or you squeeze it out of a little barrel. Now, where I'm from in North Georgia, oftentimes you'll buy honey that's liquid, but it's got a big chunk of honeycomb floating in the jar. So if you're ever traveling in the South and you see a mason jar that's full of honey with this comb floating inside, buy it. It's really good. It's chunk honey. Top right-hand corner, this was entirely new to me until I moved to the Midwest, but it's something called creamed honey, where that liquid honey has been allowed to crystallize and make really small crystals. And that's creamed honey. The bottom left-hand corner is comb honey, and this is how I grew up eating honey. And that is you eat the comb, not these, but you eat the comb and the wax and everything all at the same time. So the 4 big groups, again, are liquid, chunk, creamed, or comb. The picture in the bottom right-hand corner is just to sort of encourage you as you're traveling around, during vacations or whatever, try to find local sources of honey because you may be really surprised. Because honey is very unique in that the color and the texture and the taste is all dependent on the nectar source. The picture in the middle is of, at least as far as I've been able to try, the most light and fragrant, well, I'd say it's definitely the more lighter color, and that's fireweed. It's grown in Alaska, or you'll find it in Mount Rainier. So if you're ever traveling to Seattle and you stumble into Pikes at the market, look for fireweed. They'll often have it there for sale. A lot of beekeepers will carry their bees up the mountain and they'll make fireweed. It's almost as clear as water. The kind of far other extreme in terms of darkness is buckwheat. And you can buy that here in Wisconsin. It's a big export from this state. And so that gives you the range of kind of light, very clear, almost like water, to dark and opaque. The bottom right-hand corner is more of a nod to my favorite, which is sourwood. And sourwood comes from trees that are native to the Appalachian range of the United States. It's extraordinarily delicious. So the honey in kind of the bottom center here is honey from Hawaii. And it comes out of the hive in this sort of opaque white color. Nothing's been done to it. And so what I'd like to do, again, at the next class is have a honey show. And I've collected honey, like I said, as I've traveled to Hawaii and to the southeast and around the United States. I always bring a jar back for this class. So every year, we'll put out 15 different types of honey, and you can try it all at the same time to get a sense of the variety in the taste and texture and color. And so you may find a new one that you like. As I mentioned earlier about wax production, I'm going to show this picture to you to give you a sense of, when I said the glands on the underside of the abdomen of the worker, you can see the worker stingers right there, so give you a sense of scale. These are wax flakes or wax scales that are being kind of extruded. 1 pound of wax takes about 570,000 of these flakes. and you're going to make a lot of wax. It's really, really expensive in terms of energy for a honeybee to make wax. It takes about 6 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So it's really energy intensive, and for a beekeeper, oftentimes represents a fairly significant income source. So in a lot of cases, and certainly as I've met, a lot of beekeepers will make honey, but then they'll collect the wax out of their hives as part of their beekeeping experience and make things with that wax because it's another source of income for them. When honeybees are making wax, and you'll see this in your own hives, they'll hang themselves together kind of leg to leg to leg. If you see this worker here, she's walking up and down this chain and she's collecting these extruding flakes. That little bugger right there is a gorilla mite. You're going to learn all about that in a little bit. There's some other hive products if you've ever been to health food stores and you're kind of curious. The first is called propolis, and propolis is a substance that's made from either flower buds or from certain trees. And so it's kind of like sap from pine trees. It's a fairly similar consistency to that. Some flower buds make it, and honeybees will go and collect this material. And propolis will get spread over your entire hive. And the bees do this. It's kind of the glue that they use to hold everything within their hive together. It's got great antimicrobial properties, antiviral, antifungal properties. And so honeybees use this propolis as just sort of a generic way to kind of keep their house kind of sanitized. The next one down is royal jelly, and you can kind of see a little jar of it here. I guess you can buy this in health food stores. Most of the royal jelly that is sold in the United States is made in China, and so there has been some concern over the last couple of years about quality controls and sort of a question whether or not it's safe. But if you're keeping your own bees and you want to try it, royal jelly it's really rich in sugars and hormones. If you wanted to eat that. So the last thing is pollen, and I like pollen. I think it's really delicious. It's kind of a nutty flavor, and I'll bring some for you to try. Pollen, this guy's kind of having a big mouthful in the bottom right-hand corner. Pollen is something that you'll also find in health food stores that have been collected from hives, and so it's I think it tastes kind of nutty. It's pretty tasty. I'm going to end this lecture here. Rather than going into diseases, I'm going to postpone this one because I'd like to spend a whole kind of lecture talking to you about some of the diseases in honeybees, but not to make you afraid. Again, honeybees they're not domesticated, so they don't really so much depend on us to fix their ailments. They've been around for 145 or so million years, and so they've got a pretty gosh darn good handle on things. They just sometimes can appreciate a little help along. So during the disease lecture, please don't feel like your bees are going to die. I know that it's a tough topic, but I want to at least make you aware of some of the types of maladies that are out there. Let's do this. Let's take another 10 minutes, and then we come back, and we're going to talk next about equipment. Does that sound good?
We put a